Having completed Autobiography 10, which brings me up to the present, I'd like to devote some time to reflect on these past 78 years, focusing on what, if anything, I would like to have changed. I'm not picking out any specific moments, rather on a redirection of path. More to the point, what have I learned over the years about myself and the course my life has taken? Often the path is not the result of any thoughtful or considered strategy, but the path of least resistance, or based on expectations of others like our family, or what contemporary culture and society deem desirable, or at least acceptable. Childhood can have an enormous impact on an individual as their immediate environment shapes the way they see the world, and sometimes, unfortunately, how quickly they adapt can be a matter of survival. I can't speak to this situation since my childhood was spent in a classic mid-20th century nuclear family. Considering this, I was very much a product of what passed as a normal childhood at the time and period. Generally speaking, a child's mind is not focused on the future. Every day opens a new world. The future and the past are little more than abstractions. If asked, what would you like to be when you grow up? The answer is influenced by what the child has been exposed to, from videos watched to stories read or heard, or based on the parents' occupations. The question itself is an abstraction, and the answer clearly uninformed. A child thinks in terms of what's fun or exciting at the moment. How much can a youngster be realistically expected to know about themselves, their innate abilities, strengths and weaknesses? I was fascinated by the environment around me, the natural world, especially the blue sky, the bright sun, the mystery of the stars, the moon, the darkness and the seeming void that dominated the night sky. I grew up as our society was beginning to look upward, fascinated by soaring rockets and the real possibility of space travel. I couldn't help but be swept up by the popular culture in this regard, but I was still mostly unaware of my own intellectual abilities and how I could even anticipate what I might come to be interested in over time. I was very much a child of the traditional 1950s family. Father working, a mother managing the home, preparing meals, and pretty much responsible for the parenting. I didn't know or really care about the wider world. My world encompassed how far I could wander and explore. As related in previous videos, I was pretty laid back. There's little of that period of life that I'd change in any event, except perhaps to have had the opportunity to be exposed to more people, places, and things. Jumping ahead for a moment, my daughter has worked diligently to expose our grandchildren to as much as possible, like traveling, museums, camps, and more. The elementary school years were exciting as my social and intellectual worlds broadened. Growing up within an industrial society, education, routine, and discipline became important as I was now expected to behave in a certain way and learn things in a more formalized and organized manner, a certain amount of time devoted to each subject. The goal being to become a productive member of a society based very much on capitalism. There was virtually no effort at home to expose me to new experiences or knowledge sources. My mother was only 18 when she introduced me to the world, and my father was far too involved making a living. My mother was raised in a broken family herself. I fulfilled my educational expectations and was certainly not a rebel or a behavior problem. Like all children, I was raw material to be molded into a productive member of society. With little regard as to my uniqueness, what kinds of learning experience would allow or encourage me to exploit innate abilities or guide me to the most satisfying life. During these years, I began to understand the idea that some kids were quicker to learn things, while some found absorbing and incorporating information more challenging. I didn't consider myself exceptional in any way, or particularly gifted in any area. What did I know of the purpose of what we were learning? By the sixth grade, academic groupings were becoming more important, as did class standing. Having said that, I should add that when it came to schoolwork, I was on my own with little help or guidance from my parents. The assumption was that I would do what was required, with quarterly report cards providing the measure of achievement, particularly any remarks the teachers might add to them. But I was always inquisitive, wanting to know and understand how the world and the things in it worked. During these early years, my interest gravitated towards science, especially the cosmos. Other subjects, like language, were just activities I had to endure. Why was it even necessary to learn sentence construction, for example? So much more is involved in what and how we write than simply learning how to string sentences together. Might it not have been more appropriate to learn by composing and writing about things and exercising our imagination and self-expression in the form of original stories and exploring the worlds of art and music? But those are not particular abilities that brought the greatest rewards in the culture we inhabited. At the end of the sixth grade, we were grouped into tracks for the next stage of our formal education, junior high. I was placed in the B group, those believed to be college-bound. The A group kids were regarded as smarter and more would be expected of them academically. There was also the C and D groups, which, in retrospect, was abominable. The psychological impact on these kids must have been devastating. Talk about negative reinforcement. I was a little disappointed I didn't make the A group, but this was my introduction to the very real world of intellectual grouping without understanding as to the inherent limitations and narrowness of such an educational strategy. But its importance in the pursuit of future career paths was evident and very real. Knowing that I was considered college-bound was at least a bit of an ego boost. But even then, I began to limit my choice of possible future careers based on the flawed ideas that there were some things I wouldn't be smart enough to consider. But what did I really know about my natural abilities and strengths, or areas that I might excel in? School hadn't done much to help me to understand those aspects. It was only in junior high that I was given both interest inventories and intelligence tests. Based on these, I had an extrapolated IQ of 115 or so, though later in life I would be assessed at 130 for whatever meaning that had or has. My highest aptitude was spatial relations, scoring the 95th percentile for my age group. It was during junior high that I became intrigued by electronics and had enough interest and fortitude to read through an extensive series of some dozen military training manuals on the subject, twice. Interesting to think about why that topic in particular, I don't recall. Here I have to express an opinion that I've held for many years, and which can be gleaned from my previous comments. The real focus of early education should be understanding self, our natural abilities and talents, and to have the opportunity to explore interests. While academics is important, if folks had a better understanding of themselves from youth, it would help to follow a life path that would be more satisfying and fulfilling. To heck with unsustainable goals that would only act to bombard one with stresses that result from misplaced goals and mismatched career choices. I think that a flawed mindset impacted me during those formative years. In other words, I was still very interested in science and space, but I also felt that getting into occupations in these fields was probably beyond my capabilities. The future would prove this to be false. Fairly early on, I lowered my goals to perhaps doing something in the field of electronics at least, or perhaps becoming a teacher, which I felt was eminently doable. I feel I had a mistaken belief in my own abilities and how it affected the way I viewed my prospects and goals. Looking back, I only wish I had more self-confidence and drive. At this point in life, possibilities should have been essentially boundless. In addition to which, the world was evolving so quickly and dramatically that conforming to contemporary expectations would prove to be silly. Instead, I thought in terms of material things and earning money. My greatest goal was to own a car. I jumped at the chance to work part-time at my father's service station, which I did as much as possible. When I might have spent free time socializing with peers and playing sports, I was pumping gas, washing cars, changing tires. It was really no effort on my father's part to teach me anything about the vehicles. What I learned, I picked up by observation. But almost as soon as I got my driving license, I bought my own car and was expected to pay to maintain it. Materialism is a powerful attractor. Junior high turned out to be a great time for me academically. I excelled in my lessons and scored all A's in 8th grade and came close in 9th grade. A hint of my creative potential was exhibited when I composed a brief poem that appeared on the title page of our junior high graduation booklet. I also won an honorable mention at a city-wide competition with my display of John Glenn's orbital achievement. High school was a different matter, though. Socially, I floundered amidst my class of some 450 peers. I didn't mix with fellow students much, beyond the half dozen friends that I chummed around with during those 3 years. Academically, I did well and ended up ranking 45th out of 450 in my graduating class. My areas of interest expanded to include world history, especially Russia and China. However, my goals hardly changed as I continued to underestimate my potential and settled on attending Worcester State College, believing that I would probably be wasting time applying to other colleges. Of course, the tuition also had something to do with that as well. No encouragement from my parents. And becoming a teacher in either math or science, I would eventually get teaching certificates in both. Reflecting on those years, I would have benefited greatly from a realistic understanding of my actual abilities and greater self-confidence and drive, for which I have to take responsibility. This is not to say that science would have been the best choice for my occupation anyway. I was creative, had a good imagination, a talent for organization, and a latent talent for writing that hadn't been tapped or exploited to this point. How does one come to realize these qualities that don't lend themselves to easy evaluation or assessment? My first 2 years in college were really an extension of high school. But during the second year, I hit a rut. I wanted to get out into the wider world and explore other places and have new experiences. An aside, as of 2025, my wife and I have taken many land trips and over 50 cruises, during which we've visited many countries and cities around the world, so that the travel bug has been accommodated but not really sated. But there was the Vietnam War to contend with. I was sure that I would be drafted into the service if I just quit college. I decided that putting in a few years in a non-combatant role in the service might not be a bad idea. I ended up enlisting in the Navy, much to my parents' chagrin. I had a battery of tests in the Navy and was told that I could enter pretty much any rating except those involving foreign language. I really desired something in electronics, but to obtain the extensive schooling that they offered would require an extension of my 4-year commitment by an additional 2 years. So I settled on something called communications technicians, which did involve some electronics, but, as it turned out, was more oriented to intercepting and decoding Soviet submarine transmission. Another aside, I was never posted to a ship, only land-based facilities. The Navy certainly fulfilled my desire for new experiences, but my intellectual growth was somewhat stunted. I did take various correspondence courses in history, and I was also tapped to write regular pieces for the base newspaper that simply involved summarizing the social activities of my working group. Upon completion of my tour, I returned to college and received my BA in history with a math minor. Eventually, I received an MED. After purchasing my first computer in the mid-70s, I immersed myself in all things related to personal computers, including associated peripherals and programming languages, to the point of obsession. My knowledge of computers combined with my communications and writing skills led to a series of 26 stringer articles written for a regional newspaper, the Patriot Ledger, at a time when people still read newspapers. Eventually, that led to my being hired as an instructor in computing, and concurrently, the first director of academic computing at the liberal arts-focused Curry College in Milton, Mass. There I exercised my teaching and managerial abilities for over 9 years. In 1987, I received the Faculty Achievement Award for, quote, bringing Curry gently into the information age, end quote. On the surface, this sounds like a success story, but there was a cost. During the 70s, I spent 7 years as a claims representative for Social Security Administration. But the stresses from that job contributed to a heart condition called paroxysmal atrial tachycardia, PAT, that caused my heart to race abnormally at times. Medication ameliorated that problem, but I found it necessary to resign to avoid the stress. Depression also plagued me since around the same time. By the early 90s, I was seeing psychiatrists, psychologists, taking medication to allow me to function. It appears that the qualities that contributed to an apparently successful life, like teaching, managing equipment and people, and a compulsive personality, were taking their toll on my health. I should also note that I was never fired from any jobs I entered. To the contrary, I was always asked to reconsider my resignation. So where did I go wrong? How could I have avoided these problems? Perhaps it's best to begin with the activities that bring me the most pleasure and fulfillment. It would have to do with things that run counter to the contemporary societal and cultural norms that pervade our modern worldview, like expanding my knowledge of the world and existence in general, abstract thinking about philosophy and the nature of life, self-expression in the form of writing, and discussions with others having similar broad interests. On the interpersonal level, I enjoy learning about other people and by listening and engaging with them, watching my grandchildren grow and mature, and the power of love to soothe and enrich life. Here I'm thinking about my wife in particular. I often think of myself as perhaps overly sensitive to the external events which cause me to worry about how unfair life can be for so many who were born as innocent as myself. This sensitivity is at odds and antithetical with the reality of the modern world, thus the stress and depression. I am attracted to philosophy of certain ancient personalities who seem to have had similar natures like the Buddha and Christ. But it says something when we consider how their philosophies have been perverted by those who felt it was necessary to systematize and construct fallible institutions based on the corruption or misunderstanding of the core beliefs. While both of these revered individuals wanted their ideas spread, they didn't concern themselves with constructing elaborate institutions to propagate their beliefs. It's likely they understood the tendency of flawed human nature to misinterpret or reinterpret the central beliefs of the founders. If I had to assign a theme song to what I'm trying to express, it would be the song by John Lennon, Imagine. While I think I have achieved a certain degree of self understanding, what does that have to do with how I should have lived my life? I think in my case, I would have been better suited to have pursued a different path, a path that valued creativity, encouraged thoughtful discussion, and expressive writing, that believed in the power of the arts to enhance and expand consciousness, that delved into philosophy, ethics, psychology, and understood the power of love. It would provide the basis for a deeper and ultimately more humane existence for our species, thus allowing our species to exist for a longer period. We are, after all, rather youthful as a species. The question now becomes, where would I have found such an environment? As I consider the last statement, it sounds like I should have become a monk, but I would have not appreciated the routine and the overly narrow religious focus. Curiously enough, if you haven't already guessed a better path, my pick may surprise you. I think I would have been better served pursuing a purely academic path that would place me in the soft science area, like philosophy or intellectual history. Having spent 10 years at a liberal arts college, I really enjoyed the discussions with colleagues about all sorts of topics, with their liberal, open, and generally accepting nature. Writing, particularly books, was not only encouraged but expected. My soft science colleagues' upper level courses were populated with motivated students who were not hesitant to debate or question a lesson or a point. While I was in the right environment at Curry, my technical position restricted my latitude when it came to courses I could teach, though I did create and teach a course called The Cultural Impact of Information Technology, which explored areas far removed from the regular computer curriculum. I could expand further on several points with ease, but I think this overview conveys the gist of my thoughts on how I might have altered my life path. Surprisingly, in writing this piece, I found that I wouldn't have made as drastic a change as I thought I might.